There's a generation that was promised the world and inherited its ruins. You were told that if you worked hard enough, if you followed the rules, if you earned the right degrees and checked all the boxes, you would be rewarded. You were raised on the mythology of meritocracy, on the belief that effort equals outcome, that passion plus persistence equals stability. And so you did everything right. You studied until your eyes burned. You internalized the mantra that sleep was for the lazy, that rest was a luxury you couldn't afford. You optimized yourself, commodified your hobbies, turned your personality into a personal brand. You became fluent in the language of productivity, of side hustles, of grinding. And still, the finish line kept moving. This isn't a story about laziness. This isn't about entitlement or fragility or any of the labels that have been weaponized against you. This is about a generation caught in the undertow of a promise that was broken before you were old enough to understand what promises meant. This is about the psychology of existing in a world that simultaneously demands everything from you and offers you nothing in return. This is about what happens to the human psyche when the social contract you were raised to believe in dissolves beneath your feet. You are the first generation in modern history expected to be worse off than your parents. Think about that for a moment. Not in some abstract economic sense, but in the visceral reality of your daily life. Your parents bought homes in their 20s. You're still trying to figure out if you'll ever afford to stop renting. They had pensions, job security, the reasonable expectation that loyalty to a company would be reciprocated. You have gig work, contract positions, the knowledge that you are always replaceable. They retired at 65. You'll likely work until you physically can't anymore, and even then, you're not sure what will catch you. This isn't complaining. This is context. Because what happens when an entire generation grows up in the gap between expectation and reality? What happens when the world you were prepared for and the world you actually inhabit are so fundamentally different that the skills you were taught become obsolete? What happens when you're told to dream big while simultaneously being crushed under the weight of student debt, housing crises, climate anxiety, and the paralysis of infinite choice? You adapt, but adaptation comes at a cost. Let's talk about what psychologists call ambiguous loss. It's a term usually reserved for situations like dementia, where a loved one is physically present but psychologically absent, or for families of missing persons who can't grieve because there's no closure. But ambiguous loss also describes what you've been living through. You're grieving a future that was supposed to exist but never materialized. You're mourning stability you never had, opportunities that evaporated, milestones that keep slipping further out of reach. You're experiencing the loss of something you were promised but never actually possessed. And here's the cruelty of ambiguous loss. Society doesn't validate it. You can't grieve something that was only ever a possibility. You can't mourn a timeline that exists only in your imagination. So you internalize it. You tell yourself you're not working hard enough, not smart enough, not resilient enough. You pathologize your own exhaustion. You mistake structural failure for personal inadequacy. This is the water you're swimming in. This is the invisible current pulling you under while everyone on the shore asks why you're not swimming harder. Your childhood was the rehearsal for a play that got canceled. You were raised by parents who, for the most part, had experienced upward mobility. They climbed higher than their parents. They believed in progress, in the idea that each generation would have it better than the last, and so they raised you with that same faith. They told you to follow your passion. They said you could be anything you wanted to be. They enrolled you in activities, pushed you toward excellence, gave you the world, and told you it was yours to conquer. But they were preparing you for their world, not yours.
And when you emerged into adulthood, you found the landscape had shifted. The recession hit just as you were entering the job market. The cost of living skyrocketed while wages stagnated. The jobs that did exist demanded years of experience for entry-level positions, offered unpaid internships as opportunities, treated you as disposable. The world you inherited was one of precarity, of instability, of constant gnawing uncertainty. And yet the narrative didn't change. You were still told to work harder, to be more flexible, to adapt. The story remained the same. If you're struggling, it's because you're not trying hard enough. This is what psychologists call betrayal trauma, though it's rarely discussed in generational terms. Betrayal trauma occurs when the people or systems you depend on for survival violate your trust. As a child, you depended on the adults around you to prepare you for the world. You trusted that the rules they taught you were accurate, that the promises they made were real. And they believed it too, but the system they believed in betrayed all of you. The result is a generation characterized by what looks like paralysis, but is actually profound disillusionment. You were taught that hard work would be rewarded, and then you worked yourself to the bone while watching corporations post record profits while cutting your hours. You were told that education was the key to success, and then you graduated with tens of thousands in debt into a job market that treated your degree as a baseline requirement, not a distinguishing feature. You were promised that home ownership, family, stability were achievable if you just followed the path, and then you watched the path crumble. And so, you stopped believing in the path. This is where the stereotypes come from, the think pieces about millennials killing industries, the jokes about avocado toast and participation trophies, the accusations of narcissism, fragility, failure to launch. But these aren't character flaws. They're symptoms of a system in collapse. You're not killing industries because you're frivolous. You're making rational economic decisions in an irrational economy. You're not narcissistic because you post on social media. You're trying to build connection and visibility in a world that feels increasingly isolating and indifferent. You're not failing to launch. You're refusing to launch into a void. Let's talk about what this does to your nervous system. Chronic uncertainty is a form of trauma. Your brain is wired to seek patterns, to predict outcomes, to feel safe in knowing what comes next. But you've grown up in a state of perpetual unpredictability. Will you have a job next year? Will you be able to afford rent? Will the planet be habitable for your hypothetical children? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're immediate, visceral anxieties that shape every decision you make. And your nervous system responds accordingly. You're living in a state of hypervigilance, constantly scanning for threats, unable to fully relax, because relaxation feels like a luxury you can't afford. This manifests as anxiety, yes, but also as the burnout that's become synonymous with your generation. You're exhausted not because you're weak, but because you're running a marathon at sprint pace and the finish line keeps moving. Burnout isn't just being tired. It's a state of chronic stress that depletes your physical, emotional, and mental resources. It's characterized by emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. Sound familiar? You're exhausted from working multiple jobs and still barely making ends meet. You're cynical because you've watched every system you were told to trust fail you. You feel like nothing you do matters because the goalposts keep shifting. But here's what they don't tell you about burnout. It's not an individual failing. It's a systemic issue being pathologized as a personal problem. You're not burnt out because you're bad at self-care. You're burnt out because you're trying to survive in conditions that are fundamentally unsustainable.
And the cruel irony is that the same culture that created these conditions now sells you the solution. Meditation apps, wellness retreats, therapy as a consumer product, self-optimization as the answer to structural inequality. You're told to fix yourself when the problem isn't you, it's the water you're drowning in. This brings us to something darker, something that sits at the intersection of economics and psychology, the erosion of your sense of self. Identity formation happens through a process of exploration and commitment. You try different roles, different beliefs, different paths, and eventually you commit to the ones that feel authentic. But commitment requires stability. It requires the ability to invest in something and trust that it will still be there tomorrow. And you don't have that luxury. You can't commit to a career path when industries are evaporating overnight.
You can't commit to a community when you have to move every year for rent you can afford. You can't commit to a long-term relationship when you can't even commit to being in the same city next year. You can't build an identity on shifting sand. So instead, you stay fluid, you stay flexible, you cultivate multiple skills, multiple identities, multiple backup plans. You become a person of options rather than commitments, not because you're indecisive, but because decisiveness in an unstable world is dangerous. But fluidity has a cost. It's exhausting to always be multiple versions of yourself. It's destabilizing to never feel like you can fully invest in any one path. It leaves you with a sense of incompleteness, a feeling that you're always becoming and never arriving. This is the existential dimension of your experience. You're not just economically precarious, you're ontologically precarious. Your very sense of being is uncertain. And this uncertainty breeds something psychologists have started calling decision fatigue paralysis. Every choice feels monumental because every choice could be the wrong one. Should you take this job or wait for something better? Should you move to this city or stay where you are? Should you pursue this relationship or focus on your career? Should you have children in a world that feels like it's falling apart? The weight of these decisions is crushing because there's no safety net. One wrong move could destabilize everything. So you freeze, not because you're lazy or afraid, but because the stakes are impossibly high and the information is impossibly incomplete. You're trying to make life-defining decisions in a context that offers no guarantees, no stability, no map. And then you're judged for hesitating, for taking too long, for not having it all figured out by 30. But here's what needs to be said, what needs to be understood. None of this was your fault. You were children when these systems failed. You were teenagers when the economy collapsed. You were young adults when the planet started burning. You inherited debt you didn't create, crises you didn't cause, and a world you had no hand in breaking. And yet you've been carrying the weight of it all, blaming yourselves for not being able to fix what was never yours to fix. The exhaustion you feel, the anxiety that sits in your chest like a stone, the sense that you're constantly falling behind, these aren't personal failings, they're rational responses to irrational circumstances. Your nervous system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do when the environment is genuinely threatening. You're not broken, you're responding appropriately to a broken world. And perhaps the most radical thing you can do is stop trying to optimize yourself for a system that was never designed to sustain you. Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. You were never the problem. The loneliness you feel isn't because you're bad at relationships. It's because community has been systematically dismantled in favor of individualism. The emptiness you feel isn't because you lack purpose. It's because meaning has been commodified and you've been taught to find it in productivity rather than connection. The shame you carry isn't because you're not enough. It's because you've been measured against metrics that were designed to keep you hungry, striving, never satisfied. Your generation has been criticized for rejecting traditional markers of success, but maybe you're not rejecting them. Maybe you're asking deeper questions. Not, how can I climb the ladder, but why is there a ladder at all? Not, how can I get more, but what actually matters? Not, how can I be successful, but what does it mean to live well? This is the shift. This is where the healing begins.
You've spent your whole life trying to meet expectations that were impossible from the start. You've internalized the narrative that if you just worked harder, sacrificed more, optimized better, you'd finally arrive at some promised land of security and satisfaction. But that land doesn't exist. It never did. It was a mirage, a story told by one generation to another, passed down until it became dogma. And now you have a choice. You can keep chasing it, keep exhausting yourself in pursuit of a fantasy, keep measuring your worth by standards that were designed to keep you feeling inadequate, or you can let it go. Letting go doesn't mean giving up.
It means releasing the belief that your value is determined by your productivity, your salary, your ability to perform success. It means recognizing that you are enough, exactly as you are, in this moment, with all your uncertainties and failures and unfinished stories. It means understanding that the game was rigged, and refusing to play doesn't make you a loser, it makes you free. And this is where your generation's supposed weaknesses become your greatest strengths. Your refusal to sacrifice your mental health for a paycheck isn't entitlement, it's wisdom. Your insistence on flexibility and meaning isn't instability, it's adaptability. Your openness about struggle, your willingness to go to therapy, to talk about anxiety and depression and burnout, this isn't fragility, it's courage. You're breaking generational cycles of silence and shame. You're refusing to pretend everything is fine when it isn't. You're also building something new, even if you can't see the full shape of it yet. You're creating different models of success, different ways of living, different definitions of what it means to thrive. You're asking for work-life balance, for mental health support, for systems that actually sustain human beings instead of extracting from them. And yes, it's messy. Yes, you're figuring it out as you go. But every generation that has ever faced systemic collapse has had to do the same. You're not the first to inherit a broken world, but you might be the first to refuse to keep breaking yourselves trying to fix it. So what now? How do you move forward when the path you were promised doesn't exist? You start by being honest about where you are. You stop pretending you're fine when you're not. You reach out. You find your people. You build communities of care in the cracks of a system that offers none. You set boundaries with work, with family, with anyone who tries to make you feel small for wanting more than survival. You give yourself permission to rest, to change your mind, to take longer than you thought you would. You stop measuring your life against timelines that were never realistic in the first place. And most importantly, you remember this. You are not a productivity machine. You're a human being with inherent worth that has nothing to do with your output, your achievements, your ability to monetize your existence. You matter because you exist, not because of what you produce. The world you were promised may be gone, but the world you're building, slowly, imperfectly, collectively, might actually be worth living in. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and yours. There's a generation that was promised the world and inherited its ruins, but ruins can become foundations, and maybe, just maybe, what you build from the wreckage will be something better than what came before. If this resonated with you, if you felt the weight of carrying a future that was never truly yours, know that you're not alone in this. There are millions of us learning to let go of impossible expectations and redefine what it means to live well. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring these depths together. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You're doing better than you think.